At the end of the 2000s, the world was all about stimulating your senses, and what better way than with a pack of 5 gum. With its futuristic design aimed at a younger demographic, it would change the market of gum consumption. If you came from this era like I did, 5 gum commercials were some of the most bizarre, sensory-inducing pieces of advertising that made you want to know how it feels like to chew 5 gum. The commercials would usually air on channels like MTV, Spike, or Teen Nick, as those TV stations were meant more for teens and young adults, which 5 gum had been targeting, similar to Sprite Remix or Crunk Energy, which I have done videos on. This would in return create a meme that lasted through the mid-2010s because of the slogan, "How it feels to chew 5 gum. Stimulate your senses." People would either dub the audio over videos like an exotic dancer falling from a pole, or reviews of other brands making a reference to 5 gum itself. You cannot get away from the brand at the end of the 2000s, and I mean, why would you when they had flavors like Elixir, Zing, and React, which were more fruity and so damn addicting. React and the fruit flavor was my go-to as a kid, and my mom would usually get me a pack when it was on sale. But as the 2010s formed shape into the 2020s, we started to see less of 5 gum. Was this due to less advertising and consumer shifts, or was it something more with the investors behind it and wrongful corporate moves? The mind-altering blast of 5 gum was the definition of the late 2000s and early 2010s. Each stick would pack a punch on all 5 senses, making for a wave of sensation. This would in return lead to an industry shift, as 5 gum would be introduced into markets in 2007 and 2008 under Wrigley, who has had a big hand in most of the gum you see on store shelves. Mars Incorporated, which also plays a role in the industry with brands such as M&M's, would also be in the spotlight for 5 gum, but I will speak more on that later in this video. Wrigley needed a new way to bring in more sales. Sugar-free was starting to be consumers' choice, and under a few studies, 5 gum would be aimed at younger consumers, as the 2000s saw a rise of corporations trying to reach teens or young adults through wacky and bizarre advertising campaigns due to the bland appeal most consumer goods had. Realistically, this type of advertising started in the 90s, and you could see it under other brands like Sprite Remix or Danimals Crush Cups heavily in the 2000s. This would show the Wrigley Corporation that 5 gum could reach worldwide consumption, as each commercial that aired would be crazier than the last, and truthfully it worked because it got stuck in people's memory of what they just watched, which would incentivize a big amount of sales. Most commercials were tacky and boring, but with 5 gum hitting on pop culture references such as tracks like Sexy Back by Justin Timberlake, or just its futuristic appeal, it would get people like myself hooked. As a kid, watching those commercials made me beg for a pack of 5 gum because I wanted to know if it really could stimulate my senses. This would lead to the next phase of 5 gum, which was its success. As the 2000s and 2010s unwrapped, so would 5 gum. It didn't just stimulate the senses, it stimulated the ever-changing industry. When 5 gum hit the shelves in 2007, it would change how we consumed gum, as it was one of the first to offer a uniquely designed pack of 15 sticks that were thinner but had a burst of flavor. Gum was kind of boring during that time and either had a cartoony or bland corporate appearance, but when 5 gum chewed its way into the industry, each stick would be wrapped in a more eye-popping color of foil, which incentivized kids like me to pretend I had a grill. Fun fact, I did a video on that as well. By 2013, 5 gum would be a top seller, which put it in the ranks of other gums like Orbit, who also had some wacky commercials during that time that made it very, very successful. But it wasn't just sales that 5 gum had achieved, as it would use YouTube for truth or dare challenges that were on its packaging, which can be a cringeworthy experience to put out there for the internet to see. It would also play into the gaming atmosphere, teaming up with brands such as Razer, which has been one of the largest brands to spawn LED lighting and compact gaming experiences. This joint venture would create Respawn, which spawned another generation in 5 gum. Hell, even in recent times, 5 gum has partnered with Cat's Eye, who have seen worldwide success in pop music under tracks like Gabriella, which has been all over the radio, TikTok, and YouTube. YouTube. That song is such a freaking bop, but even with all of these advertising efforts, it still wouldn't stop 5 Gum from fading into nostalgia. As the 2020s approached and we all got packaged into our rooms because of a pandemic, 5 Gum would slowly disappear from the spotlight. Now, it was actually during the mid-2010s that 5 Gum would fade. It was in an awkward position of being too late in an already shifting market, but also being the face of the shift. Gum sales were at a decline by the 2010s, and consumers were finding other alternatives that lasted longer with flavor and were far more cheap. When 5 Gum released, it was treated as a more premium option, and an average pack was around $1.50, while a 3-pack combo was around $3.50. Considering that in today's climate, most average gums sell for that price, this would mean with inflation, 5 Gum is close to 6 bones, which can be seen within stores like Walmart. That is pretty costly for just spearmint. Now, remember how I mentioned Mars had an involvement with 5 Gum? In 2008, Wrigley would deal with Mars for a $23 billion acquisition. What is interesting about this deal is that it happened during the 2008 recession, which would have seen some difficulties. But this joint venture created some turmoil with other investors because of the debt left behind, and it would cause some of the Mars Wrigley locations to shut down. Now, I did find that Wrigley Jr., who took part in Wrigley itself, had ventured out to the cannabis market in 2018, only to see some lawsuits with investors a few years after. Now, 5 Gum has always been seen as sugar-free, which made it so compelling in the 2000s because consumers were looking for less sugary options. But as more studies came to the public eye, aspartame that can be found in 5 Gum and is an artificial sweetener would be seen as another ingredient to stay away from because of its decline within body health. The ever-changing industry also took part in the disappearance of 5 Gum as cable was shifting to streaming and commercials were being replaced with subscription models. All of these efforts would cause a decline in senses. Don't get it twisted, 5 Gum is around and you can still see it advertised within pop culture, but it is not as big as it was. It was literally everywhere at the end of the 2000s, and the endless memes that came out of something that's so simple like gum was a big part of making it one of the top 5 brands to buy. Personally, React fruit flavor is my all-time favorite, and I can still taste the 2010s. With that being said, what is some of the nostalgia you had with 5 Gum? Did you happen to see how the industry shifted after its release, and could the advertising campaigns of the 2000s still be used today? Now, with the end of the video near, let's stimulate our senses with that end screen.